It is May 1945. A Third Army prisoner of war processing center near Munich, Germany, hums with the sound of shuffling boots, clinking mess kits, and the low murmur of thousands of defeated men. The war in Europe is over. The great machinery of the German military has broken into pieces, and those pieces are now being counted, sorted, and filed away by young Americans in olive drab. Inside the main intake hall, the air smells of sweat, damp wool, and floor wax. Hundreds of German prisoners sit on long wooden benches, waiting for their names to be called. In a chair near the center of the room sits an SS officer. He does not look defeated. He looks impatient. He removes a black and silver medal from his tunic, holds it up to the light, and frowns at the smudge on the medal. This story reveals exactly what happened when that arrogant officer tried to treat an American soldier like a servant, and it shows the devastating public lesson George S. Patton delivered to prove that the old regime was truly dead. This is the story of what happened when an arrogant SS officer tried to treat an American soldier like a servant, only to find out exactly what Patton did when a defeated prisoner forgot his place. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happens when the loser still thinks he is the master. Private First Class Sam Walensky was 19 years old, a quiet processing clerk from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, serving with the Provisional Intake Detachment of the Third Army. He was the son of Polish immigrants who had come to America to escape the grinding poverty of the old country, leaving behind a large family in Krakow. In 1942, those relatives were caught in the machinery of occupation when the SS executed his elderly grandmother in a brutal reprisal action against her village. Driven by grief and a quiet fury, Walensky volunteered for the army the moment he turned 18, desperate to face the men who had destroyed his family. For the past 2 weeks, he had sat at a wooden folding table in the intake hall, professionally processing 800 defeated German prisoners without uttering a single insult or losing his composure. He simply wanted to do his duty, until the afternoon a tarnished piece of silver was thrust into his face. SS Sturmbannführer Heinrich von Kessel was 38 years old, a career officer from Potsdam, Germany, attached to the security service of the Reichsführer SS. Born into a rigid Prussian military dynasty, his father had commanded a company in the Imperial Guard before the First World War, embedding a deep sense of genetic superiority into his son. Kessel joined the Nazi Party as a true believer in 1933, rising through the ranks during occupation duties in France and Italy, where he ruthlessly suppressed local resistance. He wore the Iron Cross First Class pinned proudly to his tailored, custom-fit wool tunic, an award earned for the brutal liquidation of anti-fascist partisan units. Defeat to him was merely a temporary political inconvenience, an administrative error that did not alter the natural hierarchy of the world. He genuinely believed that an American enlisted clerk was an inferior being, meant to perform menial labor for a captured officer of the Reich. By May 1945, the European war was over, but the chaos of its aftermath was just beginning to choke the roads of southern Germany. The Third Reich had dissolved into a ruined landscape of smoking rubble, shattered infrastructure, and millions of displaced people wandering between burning towns. In the sudden collapse, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers flooded toward the Western Allies, desperate to surrender to the Americans rather than face the advancing Red Army in the east. Processing centers sprouted up across Bavaria overnight, tasked with stripping the weapons, verifying the identities, and sorting the massive influx of prisoners. Junior American officers and exhausted enlisted clerks worked 18-hour shifts in packed municipal halls and makeshift camps, drowning in a sea of paperwork and military bureaucracy. Amidst this administrative nightmare, a dangerous power vacuum threatened the stability of the occupation forces. In many frontline sectors, overwhelmed American commanders let standard protocol slide, allowing high-ranking German officers to maintain their sidearms, retain their personal aides, and dictate the terms of their own confinement. These soft concessions bred a lingering arrogance among the captive leadership, who assumed their aristocratic status would shield them from the reality of total defeat. They viewed the young American draftees not as conquerors, but as undisciplined boys who could be ignored or managed through sheer intimidation. The atmosphere in the Munich processing center was thick with this unspoken tension, a fragile truce between the victors and the vanished regime. That truce shattered completely when one prisoner decided to test the limits of his captivity. Captain Daniel Roth, a 26-year-old officer from Brooklyn serving with the intake detachment, walked down the center aisle of the processing hall and stopped at Walensky's desk. Kessel sat rigid in his chair, his arms crossed over his tailored tunic, staring directly ahead. "Captain, this prisoner refuses to cooperate with standard registration," Walensky said. Roth looked at the wooden table, where a tarnished medal lay between the inkwell and the registration ledger. "What is the issue, Sturmbannführer?" Roth asked. "I have requested a routine service from this subordinate," Kessel said, his voice clipped and smooth. "My decoration is soiled from the transport truck, and I require it to be cleaned properly before I am photographed for your records." "This man is a soldier in the United States Army, not your personal valet," Roth said. "Pick up your medal and answer the clerk's questions." "I am an officer of the Reich, from a family that has commanded regiments for 2 centuries, Kessel replied, his jaw tightening. "I do not take directives from immigrant clerks, nor do I submit to the questioning of a Brooklyn shopkeeper. In a professional military, discipline is maintained, even in a temporary camp." Roth leaned his hands on the edge of the table, looking the German in the eye. "The German military surrendered unconditionally last week. Sturmbannführer, your rank means nothing here, and your family history means less. You will provide your serial number, your unit designation, and your signature on this form, or you will face immediate disciplinary confinement," Kessel scoffed, tilting his chin upward. "You may hold our bodies behind wire, but you cannot dissolve the natural order of things," Kessel said. "An enlisted man obeys an officer. That is the law of soldiering. When I see your superior, I will report this blatant insolence, and he will agree that a common draftee polishes when ordered by a gentleman." Roth straightened his jacket, his expression completely blank. "Wait here, Sturmbannführer," Roth said. The captain turned on his heel and walked directly into the administrative office behind the intake desks. He picked up the field telephone, cranked the handle twice, and waited for the operator to connect him to the forward headquarters of the Third Army. The report reached Patton within the hour. The general arrived within 90 minutes. His open-top command jeep roared into the gravel courtyard of the Munich processing facility, kicking up a thick cloud of gray dust that drifted through the open double doors of the intake hall. Patton walked in unannounced. He wore his immaculate olive-drab service uniform, his helmet liner polished to a mirror sheen, and the 4 silver stars of a full general flashing under the electric lights. On his hips hung the famous ivory-handled revolvers in their hand-tooled leather holsters. Every American soldier in the room snapped to rigid attention, the sudden clatter of boots echoing off the concrete walls. The 200 German prisoners sitting on the long wooden benches fell instantly silent, staring at the legendary commander of the Third Army. Patton did not look at them. He walked with heavy, deliberate strides straight to the registration table where Kessel sat, stopping exactly 2 feet from the German officer. He did not return Kessel's hasty salute. "Are you Sturmbannführer Heinrich von Kessel?" Patton asked. "I am, General," Kessel said, standing up and pulling his shoulders back. "I am glad a real soldier has finally arrived to correct the behavior of these." "Silence," Patton said. Patton's voice was quiet, but it carried to the furthest corners of the room. He studied the German for a long moment, his eyes moving from the polished leather of Kessel's riding boots to the silver death's head insignia on his collar, and finally to the tarnished iron cross pinned to his chest. "Did you order an American soldier to polish your medal?" Patton asked. "I requested that my property be cleaned," Kessel answered. "As an officer, I expect a certain level of professional courtesy from an occupying force. According to your captured service record, this Iron Cross was awarded for actions against partisans in the mountains of northern Italy." Patton said, "Is that correct?" "It was for anti-partisan operations." "Yes," Kessel said. "We maintained security behind the lines. You executed unarmed civilians," Patton said, his voice dropping an octave, colder now. "You hung shopkeepers and shot schoolteachers in village squares to protect your supply routes. That is what your service record calls security. You are not a gentleman, Sturmbannführer. You are a member of a criminal organization that has brought total ruin to your own country and misery to the world. The army you served is dead. The hierarchy you rely on is buried in the rubble of Berlin. You have no authority here. You have no rank here. And you expect absolutely nothing from the soldiers under my command. Patton turned his head slightly toward the aisle. Master Sergeant, bring me a tin of metal polish, a soft rag, and a cup of water from the motor pool, Patton ordered. The items were placed on the wooden table within 2 minutes. Patton looked back at Kessel. You wanted this piece of silver cleaned, Sturmbannführer? Patton said, you have 2 options. Option 1. You will sit in that chair and you will polish that metal yourself until I can see my reflection in it. While you polish, you will read aloud every single name from the execution log attached to your division's file. Option 2. You refuse. If you refuse, the metal is confiscated immediately, and you will be transferred to a high-security penal enclosure where you will spend 12 hours a day breaking rocks with a hand tool. You will have no chair, no roof, and no conversation. Decide now. You have 10 seconds. Kessel looked at Patton's face, searching for a hint of hesitation. He found none. The German's hand trembled slightly as he reached down toward the table. Kessel sat down heavily in the wooden chair, his face pale under the harsh glare of the intake lights. He picked up the soft cloth, dipped the corner into the tin of gray polish, and began to rub the silver surface of the Iron Cross. The Master Sergeant stepped forward and dropped a thick, manila folder onto the table, flipping it open to a typed list of names captured from the security service files. Kessel hesitated, his fingers pausing on the metal. Patton tapped his riding crop against his boot, a sharp, rhythmic sound that filled the dead silence of the hall. Kessel cleared his throat and began to read. Marie Dupont, Jean-Bernard Pierre Moreau. His voice was thin at first, but Patton stayed motionless, his eyes locked on the prisoner's face. Kessel spoke louder, reading the 23 names of the Italian and French partisans his unit had executed. Giuseppe Rossi, Maria Bianchi. As the names echoed through the room, the 200 German prisoners on the benches looked down at the floor, refusing to meet Kessel's eyes. The 30 American soldiers stood like statues. Walensky watched from the back of the room, his breathing slow and even. The black tarnish slowly disappeared from the metal, replaced by a brilliant mirrored shine. Sam Walensky returned to Pittsburgh in December 1945, taking a job at a local steel mill before marrying and raising 4 children. He rarely spoke about the war, but he framed the photograph of the Allied museum box and kept it on his nightstand until his death in 1988. Heinrich von Kessel was transferred to a war crimes holding facility later that month and stood trial before an American military tribunal in 1947. Convicted of war crimes related to the execution of civilians, he served 14 years in Landsberg prison before his release. He spent his remaining years living quietly in Hanover, bitter and forgotten, until he passed away in 1971. General George S. Patton never mentioned the incident in his public briefings, but he recorded the confrontation in a brief entry in his personal diary that evening. He wrote that a defeated enemy must be stripped of his illusions before he can be cured of his arrogance. Some historians have argued that Patton's unorthodox methods bordered on public humiliation, breaching the strict military protocol governing the treatment of high-ranking prisoners of war. They contend that judicial matters should have been left entirely to the established tribunal system rather than handled through theatrical, field-expedient punishments. Others have argued the opposite, defending the action as a necessary psychological tool to break the lingering fanaticism of the SS and protect the authority of the young American occupation force. What is certain is that the detailed confession extracted in the Munich processing hall provided critical, verified documentation that prosecutors used to secure convictions during the subsequent trials. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same, or would you have allowed the standard bureaucracy to handle the arrogant officer? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about when the loser still thinks he is the master, make sure to subscribe.